Welcome. Today we are looking at the Umanar tomb in Schimmel. The Umanar period is a period in the prehistory of the UAE and Oman, which dates between 2600 and 2000 BC, so a period more than 4,000 years ago. And from this period we have especially large funeral structures. And we are here in front of one of these tombs, one of these so-called Umanar tombs, which was excavated. In fact, this tomb, which is visible here, is the largest Umanar tomb ever excavated anywhere in Southeast Arabia, with a diameter of more than 12 meters. Thanks to the fact that this area later was used as a palm garden, only the foundations of this tomb have survived. So how has this tomb looked like before? What we see here is that this tomb is absolutely circular. That's a very, very typical aspect of an Umanar tomb. They are always absolute circular. And they are built on a foundation, on a plinth, as we call it, of flat light stones on which the walls of this tomb were erected. From one relatively well-preserved tomb in Al Ain, we know that these tombs had originally a height of probably nearly 3 meters. And the most fascinating aspect is that these tombs were on the outside lined with so-called facing stones. The lowest row of these stones you still can see on the outside here. Limestone from the mountains, whitish in character, and really lined for the tomb, following the circle of the tomb. So in fact, originally, this tomb would have looked like a 3-meter high white tower, very visible in the landscape when it was originally built. These large tombs were not built for a single person. They are called collective tombs because they were used for a community by a large number of people, probably a tribe or a large family, a family group, for a long period of time. So there's not a single burial inside, but this tomb was used over probably 150 years by hundreds of people. And so we know from the examinations by the anthropologists that we found in this very destroyed tomb still the remains of more than 450 people which were once buried in this chamber. How was the tomb organized in the inside? Let's have a look at it. As you can see here, inside we do have a long wall which runs from one end of the tomb to the other side, and which was more or less a sort of division wall in the center. And then you see further walls here, which are not running to the wall but leaving a small gap. These are chambers, and altogether we had originally 6 chambers here. The wall here has been robbed from its stones by later periods, as well as the wall of between the last 2 chambers. So dividing this half here into 6 different chambers. When you look on the other side, it's a little bit different. We do have here a division into 4 chambers, plus another small division into 2 chambers. So the whole tomb was divided into 3 different parts and might have been used by 3 different family groups, tribal groups, which had different space. One had 6 chambers, another one had 4 chambers, and the smallest group had 2 chambers only for their use. Still, how can you imagine here more than 400 people buried? And there we come to a very special aspect of the Umanar culture. There were 2 different burial rites which might have followed one after the other. When somebody died, he was buried in person, tightly bound together in a crouched position into one of these chambers, like the one over here. Probably starting by the end, having somebody buried. And then people were buried one after the other until the chamber was filled. And the next chamber was filled, and the next chamber, and the next chamber. This might have taken 10, 15 years, or even longer, to fill all the chambers. Every time somebody died, the small entrance door, which was on a height probably of this height, was opened. A person was brought inside, and then the door was closed again. But at one point all the chambers were filled. And then we come to a special aspect of this tomb, because this tomb originally had two stores. We have the lower one, and then about at this height, or even higher, there were slabs inside the chamber, more or less creating a second store. And what happened here is that when the lower chamber was filled, maybe in a big ritual, we don't know because we have not found any traces of it, all the buried people of the last 20, 30 years were taken out and burned somewhere in a big funerary pile. And the burned remains of these people, plus the grave goods of whatever they got into the chamber, was then taken, and this was stored in the upper chamber. And then the empty lower chamber was used for the next generation of people which died. It was filled again until it was full. A new funerary pile was made, and it was stored in the upper part. And that's the reason why our anthropologists find about 90% of all bones are burned, because they originally were in the upper store. And only 10% of the bones were the last people who were buried in the lower chamber. And the most amazing thing even is that we do have two complete skeletons. One was buried over there, and we will go there in a moment to explain a little bit about this lady which we found. But in general, this is how the people used this tomb, and with the burnt bones in the upper store, they could reuse this tomb for a very long time, and that's the reason why tombs like this might have been used for 100 or even 150 years. This is actually one of the latest tombs of the Umayyad period we know in all of the Oman Peninsula. And one interesting fact you can see with these white facing stones here, because this tomb was built so late that people already didn't produce any more facing stones. All the stones you see here are actually taken from other older tombs which must have been around in this area. And we can see this quite clearly. There is, for example, here a stone which is very small, and we know that these small tombs were originally from tombs which were built around 2600, 2500 BC. So from a tomb which is probably 4,500 years ago. We further see, when we look on this side here, a stone with a wedge in it. And this stone with a wedge is very clearly from an entrance of an older tomb, because entrances were really carved into the facing stones, and then they were using stones which had the edges and wedges to form the shape of the entrance. So this is an entrance stone of an older tomb which was reused here, and they even which would have been unthinkable in older Umanar tombs, used stones which were not really hammered and faced properly to level the height. So we can clearly see that all these stones have been taken out from older tombs and reused here, because the people had already lost the knowledge of creating these facing stones, which shows that this was one of the last tombs of the Umanar period, which was built here in Şimmel. In this corner, which was nicely protected between the outer wall and the wall of one of these chambers, we found the remains of a lady, nearly complete skeleton, only protected because in this corner, and unlike in the rest of the chambers where everything was plundered and mixed, so that we only found bones, fragments and remains, here we found a complete skeleton of a lady. In a crouched position, with one pottery vessel next to her and a big mud shell from the mangroves, which are part of the food which people ate. But the most amazing thing is that together with this lady we found a dog. So you have to imagine the lady was really here in her crouched position, the pottery vessel here, the big shell next to it. On the top of her head, above her head, in this corner, the dog was buried. And it's clearly a dog. It was analyzed by animal bone specialist. Sadly, the bones of the skull were crushed by a later roof slab which fell down. But he said from the size of the dog, from the slenderness of the bones, he assumes that even this dog, which was buried around 4,000 years ago, might have been a breed of Saluki, the dogs which are still home in this country to this day. Here we have a number of stones which were found outside the tomb, which had collapsed, but they give a quite nice overview over the development of the tombstones in the Umanar period, because, as I said, originally the earliest tombs we have from the Umanar period start with very small stones, with stones of a size like this, which are actually called, quite nice name, sugar lamps, because they're really, compared to the size of many other stones, have the size of a sugar lamp. So the earliest tombs were built with stones of that size, and then the size of the stones increased, and we do have stones which have a medium size, like this one here. And towards the end of the Umanar tombs, the stones grow in size, and the last tombs we know have been really used quite large facing stones, like this one, a stone I couldn't really pick up any longer. So you can see there is a development in the Umanar period from very small stones at the beginning to quite large blocks towards the end. The Umanar period, between 2600 and 2000 BC, is one of the most fascinating periods of Southeast Arabia, because it's a boom time. On one side it has to do with the fact that there was still more rain than there is nowadays, because we still think that in this period of time the summer monsoon was coming up to the north, and instead of only bringing rain to Salalah, he brought also rain to Southeast Arabia. So it was raining twice a year, in the winter time, like today, and in the summertime, with rains coming over the mountains from the Arabian Sea. But on the other hand, the Umanar period was so important because the Southeast Arabia had a natural product which was needed elsewhere, comparable with the oil nowadays. There were the big civilizations of the Mesopotamia, the modern Iraq, and of the Indus Valley, which is nowadays in the territory of Pakistan and India. Two large civilizations with large towns and cities which needed one product for their survival: metal, and especially copper. Because how to use iron was still not developed, and it took it nearly another 1,000 years to create temperatures and smelters which were able to produce iron objects. So copper was the metal of the day. And the mountains in what is now the southern part of Ras al-Khimah and mountains further beyond produced copper, and quite a lot of copper. And this copper, needed by the large civilizations of the Indus Valley and Mesopotamia, led to the fact that there was high traffic coming to this area, which actually is known from the Mesopotamian cuneiform texts as the area of Magan. And it's called the Kingdom of Magan, but at the same time it said that there were up to 20 kings of Magan, which means every area was probably locally ruled by a king, a sheikh, or whatever you mean. Copper was produced here, and it is not very far. Whenever you look in Southeast Arabia, it's not far from the mountains to the sea, was brought onto ships and then brought to Mesopotamia or to the Indus Valley. Actually, a big ship type in Mesopotamia was called the Magan ship. The ship which is seaworthy and is going to Magan or beyond. And we know in this period of time that this area here was really connected to all areas between Mesopotamia and the Indus valleys. And in this tomb, like in any other tomb, we find remains, most in pottery, from vessels which were produced and originate in Mesopotamia, which were produced and originated in Bahrain, which was called Dilmun, which were produced in what is today Iran, what is today Balochistan, and Indus Valley, which means the area of Pakistan and India today. So this area was connected in a wide-ranging trade network, wider than anything which you see in the next 1,000 to 1,500 years afterwards, where a lot less traffic took place, and we only have this type of trade coming up again in the last centuries BC and in the first centuries AD, where we have again a traffic which is ranging so far as to this period of time. And of course, having this copper, selling this copper, created a wealth which has never been seen before and not very much in the periods afterwards. And this is the reason why the Umana period really sticks out very much from any other period before and after. And together with these very unique tombs which they created, these white towers which were standing at the edge of their settlements, the Umana culture has quite special in its appearance.